People kept telling us their story of how they escaped the campfire. And they talked about how if it wasn't for my neighbor who came and knocked on my door to tell me there was a fire, I don't know that I would have gotten out alive. If it wasn't for my son who lives next door picking me up and putting me in their car and driving me out of there, I don't know how I would have survived. And so I started really thinking about this connection between isolation and how connected you are to your community, to your neighbors, to your friends, to your family, and how that can be really helpful in a time of a disaster.
So we were actually the beneficiaries of someone making that plan in advance to have that group of people that they were going to call. And that she saved my life that day. So absolutely having that network really saved lives.
Find your five. The idea is that, find trusted allies that can be there and can be responsive and will check in with you if a disaster were to happen.
So we recommend that you put people in your network that are down the street, that are maybe the next town over, that are outside the county, and maybe even outside the state.
The final tier of the Ready, Set, Go is that go piece, and it's simply that, it's go. Evacuation information comes in two types. The first type could be an evacuation warning. This is essentially information that we're going to push out to the public, notifying them of a potential threat in their area where they may have to evacuate their home. An evacuation order is essentially that. We are telling people that it's time to go. There is an imminent threat to life, and we do not believe that you have much time to leave the area.
Code Red is a opt-in alerting system that will dial your number. It'll send you a phone call, a text message, and an email notifying you of an emergency. That message is sent from our office, the Office of Emergency Services. It's going to be very targeted to your area, and it'll be specific to you.
At 5:13, the phone rang with the Code Red call. And so as I was going up 49, I could look over to the left and see the flames in the canyon.
The next layer is for staff to actually be out driving in the areas with a high-low siren. There's no other reason you'll hear that in an area unless we're putting out that evacuation order, not a warning, but an order.
My day started routine patrol, came in and I was notified by dispatch to respond out to the Jones fire. Houses that had evacuation tags made it so we could just pass by. We knew that the residents had already been evacuated. Residences that did not have the tags, we would have to physically go in, knock on the door, look in the windows, make sure there were no occupants inside.
Once you've been evacuated, as you're leaving, put this tag somewhere very, clearly identifiable, whether it's a mailbox, a gate, your address marker, so that deputies and officers can quickly identify if your residence has already been evacuated.
You look out my back window here on the east side, and you see how close this fire came. It was certainly a shock, and at the same time, it was such an incredible relief to have the house as safe as it was.
I think with personal preparedness and being ready, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like a lot to do, and the most important piece is to just start with one little bite at a time.
Just start the conversation. Have some sort of plan. It can be as small as a meetup place, a destination that everybody will get to, everybody in the household will get to if there's a disaster.
Recognize you live in a community, in a county, that really does take the emergency response as a priority. We have worked diligently throughout the last few years on ensuring that not only our staff are trained and prepared, but we're also putting that out for our community. The more prepared you are in your own community,
We'll call to order this special meeting of the Board of Supervisors for the purpose of reviewing our budget. Georgette, would you lead us in the pledge, please? Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this is a special meeting, and it's for the purpose of hearing written and oral comments from the public and the board concerning the proposed final budget for fiscal year 2023-24, totaling approximately $369,817,435. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our CEO, Allison Lehman.
Great. Thank you, Chair Schofield. Good morning, board members and public and staff. We're very excited to present the fiscal year 23-24 proposed budget, which represents the county's mission in action, which is to work with the community to develop sound and innovative public policy, provide strong leadership, and deliver excellent services in a fiscally responsible manner. The county budget represents a carefully crafted plan that reflects community priorities and services essential to our residents' health and safety. This budget reflects our commitment to deliver beyond core government services through careful oversight, planning, and teamwork to support a thriving community, and is reflected as we move forward with the 8 clear board policy objectives as seen on the screen. Fiscal stability and the maintenance of county core services is at the core of our 8 objectives and has been a board priority since 2010. This strategy has positioned us to build strong reserves and weather economic challenges. This budget represents a balanced approach to capitalize on grant opportunities while also preparing for potential challenges. Emergency preparedness continues to be a top priority for the Board of Supervisors. Winter storms have resulted in large-scale power outages and internet disruptions, infrastructure damage, brought our school and public services to a standstill, an increase in our fire season risk with extreme amounts of drying brush and downed trees. Our Office of Emergency Services continues to provide avenues for individuals and communities to become more resilient through free waste events, green waste events, and awarding over 26 microgrants to our growing number of Firewise communities, as well as bringing in funding for 3 large-scale shaded fuel breaks to create 1,000 acres of new protection for our residents and multiple planning projects to improve our preparedness. All of this is done not just within the county, but with our community partners, with the Fire Safe Council and CAL FIRE.
Allison?
Yes.
If we could, we don't have this on our screens.
All right, let's go ahead and take a pause and we can get that.
I'm sorry. We're blank now.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. You got it.
All right. Thank you, Chair Schofield.
Thank you.
So we're going to continue on with a focus on economic development for sustaining our rural quality of life through resiliency, high-quality jobs, investment in infrastructures, and bolstering partnerships that align with these goals. This year, we adopted the Greater Higgins Area Plan to guide the area's future economic development, housing, community character, and recreation, and secured and distributed over $100,000 in grants funding 43 Nevada County businesses, and administered over $2 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds for community resiliency grants to 34 eligible businesses and nonprofit agencies. So as we move forward to broadband, this has, since 2020, we have issued nearly $700,000 in the last mile grants to local internet service providers to expand connections. In March, we approved the countywide broadband environmental impact report, putting Nevada County in a position to have more shovel-ready projects and to be first in line for the competitive state and federal broadband dollars that will be coming down in the near future. So new to the board objectives in 2023 is climate resilience. This objective was established in recognition of Nevada County's vulnerable and to long range of climate-related hazards, and we have an opportunity to build off our current efforts from continuing to harden our infrastructure against wildfires, snowstorms, and to pursue new funding opportunities. We continue to see progress on our housing and homeless services and the objectives, including the opening of Cashin's Field, which was a 51-unit affordable housing project in Nevada City for our local workforce families. Over this next year, we expect to see progress on the Commons Resource Center, which will provide a centralized service location in Grass Valley for individuals experiencing homelessness. And we're also identifying funding to start Lone Oak Phase 2 senior project that will double the existing on-site units in Penn Valley. And the launch of our ADU or Granny Unit workbook this fall to make this type of housing more accessible and easier to navigate for residents to help increase housing stock. And then finally, the board credit for recreation is an objective in 2022 to promote sustainable recreation in partnership with community providers. We are currently underway on our Recreation Resiliency Master Plan to identify recreation needs and articulate a long-term vision for managing open spaces, recreation resources. This year, Outdoor Visitor Safety Fund grants will award another $200,000 in addition to the $400,000 awarded in 2022 for high-impact, shovel-ready recreation projects. So investing, the next slide, please. So before handing it off to your CFO, Martin Polt, I just want to bring attention to our key priorities. And this includes investing in the emergency services. We will allocate resources to better prepare our communities in the face of emergencies like wildfires, severe storms, and power outages. We will actively seek grants and leverage resources, look for opportunities to maximize the impact of county dollars on various programs and services, such as broadband, our federal earmark projects, HHSA services, and housing. Building economic resiliency and preparing for uncertainty, we will continue to focus on economic development and recreation to attract businesses and tourism. And additionally, we'll make fiscally prudent choices based on the board policy direction to ensure readiness for our future uncertainties. And supporting departments to deliver core services and prioritize board goals, we will align staffing levels in key areas to enhance the delivery of services to address board priorities in the 2023-24 budget. So we appreciate the work of our budget subcommittee, which included Chair Schofield and Vice Chair Hardy Bullock, for the hours and your generous time of going through the budget with fiscal staff in all of our departments. And I also want to recognize the many individuals who are in the chambers today, our fiscal staff, for all their work that truly begins in last fall to this date, and making sure that we provide a budget that aligns with board policy direction and represents of our community needs. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our Chief Fiscal Officer, Martin Polt.
Chair Schofield, members of the board, great to be here. Thanks, Allison, for introducing this topic. Great to be here today. So today I'm going to give you a fiscal report, and Barry's going to follow that up with a fee hearing. I think that's a scheduled item today. Definitely is. And Barry's going to present that along with some staff support. So today I'm going to do a fiscal overview for you. We'll talk a little about budget development and policies. We'll also give you some highlights of the 23-24 budget. This is your first look at that. We'll talk about some fund balances, both in the general fund and other funds. We'll give you a glimpse of revenues and expenditures in this budget. And we'll talk to you about some other challenges. And you will see definitely what Allison has described, and some of those priorities are going to absolutely be reflected in what you're seeing in this overview. So our budget process, you can see here, really a year-round process. We are really, January and February was a key point in the budget process. We had the board workshop in late January. The board set their priorities for that year, as well as reviewed and identified some other like legislative priorities and other items that we're going to move forward with the budget. That included budget policies that we'll talk about in a moment that framed this budget. So that board workshop happened. We also adopted some items in February, your board did. And then after that happened, we kicked off the budget in February. The departments diligently started working on their budgets, crunching the numbers. They worked closely with the CEO's office through February and March. And in April and May, we had the budget subcommittee. The budget subcommittee reviewed every budget that was developed and that is in this budget. And that brings us to where we are today, to the budget hearing. Throughout that process, we did have public input. Through that time, we would have our community surveys, if there was one in that year. We also have commissions and committees, the Transportation Committee Commission. We have the Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission. We bring these to the Contractors Association, the budgets. So it's been pretty well vetted in the community as far as various budgets. And so here we are today, and we will have today's budget hearing, and then this is the proposed budget, and then we'll hopefully adopt the budget next week in our next meeting at the end of the day next week. This budget format is consistent with prior years, and we're always looking at improvements and efficiencies. The budgets that you're seeing today for every department and every budget has a financial summary and some in-depth drill downs of some of the numbers are within the budget book. We also provide narratives for each budget with the mission, accomplishment, objectives, both last year's accomplishments and what's expected this year, really to connect the dollars to the mission and the objectives and performance measures of those departments. We have received for the last 8 years recognition from the Governor Finance Association for the Distinguished Budget Award. Really has been very rigorous on us. There's been some changes over the last years required for transparency, consistency of budgets, and we have abided by that and improved our budget over the years. We have a stronger connection to budgets, I mentioned, to the board priorities. So you'll see flags in various budgets that connect to those priorities that Allison mentioned. And we also, focus on the core services in those budget narratives. Also framing the budgets and the budget development process, as well as our general fiscal and budgetary practices, we have 4 key policies that provide the framework for where we are today and how we got to where we are today. One is the budget policies. We'll talk a little more about those in a moment. The board adopted those and reviewed them in your January workshop and adopted them in February. Our fund balance policy has been in operation since 2016, really defines various priorities for use of the general fund balance, as well as prudent reserves in the general fund, basically desiring to maintain key services in our county while maintaining reserves for emergencies and uncertainties. We have a debt management policy, so when we issue debt, we have a debt advisory committee, for example, the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector, the CEO's office that rigorously looks at, and we bring in experts in the field and consultants to look at each debt issuance to make sure we get the best deals and we're abiding by best practices. We also have a pension management policy. We'll talk a little more about pensions later. Really trying to do the best we can to bolster our pension situation and have the best possible outcome in our pensions that we can. So as far as budget policies, again, adopted in February, several components to those policies. These policies were given to all the departments as in kickoff as part of their guidance from the board to develop their budget. So fiscal discipline is a key area, trying to make sure the revenues and expenses balance. And if there's use of fund balance, we would that would be for anticipated use or one-time fund balance expenditures only. We also continue the vacancy review in terms of fiscal prudence. If there is a vacancy in various departments, that vacancy and position is reviewed by the department and along with the CEO to make sure that that position is relevant, that it's the position needed to provide the services necessary for that department. And then we have transparency. We do have, again, the Government Finance Officers Association has various requirements for consistency, readability. We do take pride in following those practices. And we also have the budget portal. So the budget portal currently has the proposed budget, the budget policies, various other key documents that are in the budget. And then core services are essential. That's part of these budget policies. Ensuring that we're meeting the needs of the community is essential to crafting these budgets. Staffing guidance, we do have additional staff we'll talk about in this budget. Those staffing decisions are made with sustainability in mind, making sure that we have revenue that's sustainable. We do have limited term positions in this budget, and we've started that more rigorously over the last couple of years, that if the revenue does not continue beyond a certain point, then some of the positions will be definitely reviewed for continuity. And then streamlining and organizing departments. We've done that. We did that with the recreation and economic development in this past year. We'll talk a little more about that. Really creating efficiencies, leveraging various department resources to make sure that there's support for those efforts. Investment in technology has been a key through the pandemic years, as well as post-pandemic, and continues to be creating efficiencies for staff and allowing us to do our work. So just to frame up what you're going to see in the budget, some highlights. Allison mentioned priorities, and this reflects what she described. But some of the highlights that you're going to see, big picture, bringing in more state and federal dollars to provide housing and resources for the most vulnerable people. That's going to be a theme. Another theme is being responsible and investing in critical infrastructure for public safety and manage and reduce waste. We'll see a theme, investing resources for one-time projects while maintaining healthy reserves for the future. And finally, supporting the core services of departments in the county as well as the board priorities through alignment of these resources that you're going to see. So I did want to read this core service definition because a lot of what you're going to see and the resources we have are focused on core services. This was brought to your board workshop and adopted by the board in February. Core services is fundamental to the mission of departments and the county to meet mandated and essential community services. Areas funded by the county in this category include state mandates, emergencies, services that support community health and safety, such as county infrastructure, roads, jail, justice, basic public mental health services, and other social services. So looking at the highlights of the revenue this year, we're looking at $349 million of total revenue for the county budget. That's an 8.4% increase, or $27 million from the 21-22 budget. Some of the key areas in there as far as kind of uses or sources of revenue, these are more general fund oriented, and we'll get into some more county-wide revenues in a few minutes. But property taxes increased 7.8%, or $4 million. And one thing I'll mention is we're kind of catching up for 2 years. So in the 22-23 budget, we did not have the results of the 21-22 year. So when we forecasted the 22-23, we came out a little bit low in budgeting. And so, for example, property taxes, we budgeted in 22-23 5.5%. The actuals came in at 7.1%, so we're kind of catching up. So you'll see more about property taxes, but you'll see that in a couple different areas. Transfer taxes, those are taxes that the county receives when properties are bought and sold. Significant decline in transfer taxes, and kind of reflects the state of the real estate market somewhat. Sales tax, pretty flat there, a slight decline in our projection from last year's budget, about a negative 1.2%, a pretty modest dollar amount in the general fund. And then transient occupancy tax, we continue to be strong there with the treasurer tax collector efforts to collect for short-term rentals. Some of the other federal and state revenue, we'll talk a little more about that and the significance of federal and state revenue in our budget. but pretty significant 10.6% increase in state and federal revenue. That's $15.7 million. And some of the key areas of funding for various departments and activities. Behavioral health is the largest increase in state and federal revenue, $8.9 million. That's largely reflected in the CalAIM, which is the innovation of our Medi-Cal, really creating additional Medi-Cal revenue, but also improved services to our community members. That's a huge effort on the part of our behavioral health and other departments. And Mental Health Service Act money, MHSA, there's a 3-year plan that behavioral health abides by, and that includes increasing their expenditures in the Mental Health Service Act money. Housing was big, $3.9 million of state and federal revenue. Rental assistance is a recipient of some of those dollars, as well as funding going for the Ranch House and supporting Lone Oak and the Navigation Center. We also have eligibility, which is in the Department of Social Services, another CalAIM related in a way. These are increases in CalWorks, housing, and assistance payments to our community. There's also an approximately $900,000 youth workforce grant that includes partnership with Bright Futures. Roads maintenance, another key area, they have a disaster relief vegetation grant of approximately $1 million of federal and state money. Some reductions, emergency medical preparedness, there was some temporary staffing as well as contracts in that budget unit related to COVID, so we're seeing a reduction there. And then roads capital improvements. There's always significant activity in the roads department in terms of bridges and roads, and we continue with those activities. There's just, based on the dollar coming in various years, slightly less. But we have Hirschdale, a couple Hirschdale Road projects. We have the Ridge Road, an intersection on Ridge Road improvements. So those projects are continuing. We've also seen a slight reduction in sales tax, general fund, and library as far as other revenues. We're seeing additional transfers in special revenue funds and the general fund to support department and countywide initiatives. That's $3.7 million positive. And you're going to see there's a gap between the revenue and expenses, and this is why, because we have the planned use of fund balance. So we have one-time planned expenditures, for example, the solid waste transfer station improvement project. We've been building reserves for that project, and that's about $11 million out of that fund. The second big piece of fund balance use is the Mental Health Service Act, and that, again, a 3-year plan and planned use of funds. Fund balances, you'll see, do remain healthy and continue to poise us for future uncertainty. Expense highlights, $370 million of expenses in this budget, 11.8% increase, or $39.1 million from 22-23. Some of the key increases there, salaries and benefits, that includes our permanent and temporary staffing, our healthcare costs, and our pension cost, as well as workers' comp. So about a $10.5 million increase there. One of the largest dollar increases is services and supplies. Very much related to that revenue. You'll see in a minute the federal and state revenue. We get the revenue, and we also have contracts, for example, for CalAIM to expend those funds. And other charges, those are charges between departments. Interfund charges increased about 6.8% or $4.3 million. Capital assets, again, largely driven by the MERTS. And the MERTS project is huge. It's going to increase the capacity, the flow of traffic. It's going to increase the green waste and construction capacity, and it's going to hopefully partially resolve our food waste mandated situation that we're in. So a lot of benefits to that project, by the way. So looking at some of our expenses in a little more detail, we talked about the Health and Human Service. All three of these are the expenditures that mirror the revenue that we talked about. So behavioral health, a lot of CalAIM related housing project. We talked about a few of those projects with state and federal revenue. And then we also had eligibility services. We have seen some increases in staff to provide those eligibility for Medi-Cal and other assistance programs, for example. We also see an increase in the general fund. So sheriff's operations, some strong projects in sheriff, as far as $4.5 million of general fund use there. There are various public safety projects and service projects. There's a license plate camera project that they have. They also are looking at some infrastructure projects for training, for example, at their training, dispatch and training facility, and really a focus on some other training in the sheriff's office. Corrections, a $1.4 million increase. There's some increased security system contract and some other equipment, their body scanner. Incompetent to stand trial, there's funding going toward that as a priority. Discharge coordinator, and they're looking at accreditation of the jail, which is huge. So those are some of their priorities. Probation, $1.1 million. Investing in bulletproof vests. They have a radio upgrade. The Community Corrections Partnership, or CCP, is a big activity of the probation department, and partially that effort, as well as others, to reduce recidivism and continue their school liaison activities. Other highlights: solid waste transfer station improvement, of course, we've talked about that. $8.7 million increase in expense. The library, they're going to do the Truckee refresh in Bear River Library, so some expenditures there. Cannabis has a couple of significant grants. The Department of Cannabis Compliance and the GoBiz, really to support the efforts of that department. And roads capital improvements, we talked a little about that, a slight reduction in those expenses. So Allison mentioned some of the details about the board priorities. This is the board objectives and priorities. This is kind of a snapshot of selected board priorities, but you can see the trends in when the board makes a certain effort a priority, or set of programs a priority, we really put resources and effort into that at the county. You can clearly see that here. Cannabis activity, you can see that first bar. There's now 4 permanent full-time staff members in the cannabis compliance unit for both permitting and compliance. There's also been some grants. We talked about those couple grants that are in 23-24, so major movement there. In economic development, similarly, we've had various projects in economic development related to broadband. We've had the Combi pipeline, as well as other efforts. But currently, we have our economic development department or unit open, and there's going to be an economic development action plan being developed, so some major movement there as well. Emergency management, Allison mentioned some of the grants. I believe they have 17 currently approved grants and approximately 11 that are in the pipeline, and that's approximately $60 million of grants that would be managed over a few years for the various shaded fuel breaks, access and functional need, home hardening and such. There's currently 9 staff members in that budget unit. I believe it increased by 6 in the 23-24, mostly related to some of the grants, defensible space inspectors and such. So major movement there. Housing and administration, you can see that is that big tall bar there. The most money has gone into housing, and we see that continuing. They've done an incredible job. Allison mentioned Cashin's Field. We have Brunswick Commons in the pipeline right now, the Ranch House, Lone Oaks, and other projects. So a major movement there. Recreation, this is our first year of having a staff member specifically for the recreation division, and they're supported again by our CDA agency. Climate resiliency is the newest board objective, and there's a climate resiliency action plan is in the works. We're trying to get a grant for that, so probably over the next years you're going to see movement in that area as well. This is the picture of the trend in the total county budget. Again, $369.8 million, increase of 11.8%. That's about a 9.4% increase over the last 11 years. And I do want to mention realignment, 2011 realignment particularly. It's about $22.4 million. So definitely has an impact on the size of our budget, the state mandates under realignment. I wanted to give you, before we get into the fund balances, just a picture of where we stand through May of this year. So this is basically a current snapshot going into next year's budget of how we look on some of our revenue. Sales tax is we have a caution on sales tax. We're definitely seeing slowdown. We have about an 8% reduction in some general fund sales tax. The average sales tax, including realignment, the library, and others, is about a 5% reduction over the same period last year. Business activity, a little mixed. Recording fees, which are real estate related, are seeing a pretty major decline, similar to what we talked about our transfer taxes. And the building department, so building inspection fees and other building fees are holding their own. We're seeing at least leveling off to slight increases there. Some of the planning related fees, we're kind of seeing mixed plan check fees and other fees. We're seeing mixed activities there. Roads and transit, we're seeing, you got the green arrow there. We have about a 3% increase in gas tax this year so far in the roads department. The transit department a little slightly higher than that, an increase. Property taxes, we talked about a 7.1% increase this year, which was above our budget. We're looking at average next year, so we'll see how that goes. And our assessor is very diligently with his staff looking at our properties now. Transit occupancy tax, green arrow. Again, thank you to the treasurer, tax collector. Transfer taxes, those taxes when real estate transactions occur. Again, a cautionary sign there. Cannabis taxes are actually above last year, 30% above. But we still have a caution. They're not up to what our budget this year, but really seeing some improvement there. And then the federal marshal, our sheriff leases beds to the federal marshal, and we're seeing increased revenue for those bed leases. This is what the picture looks like in revenue. We saw a pretty significant increase in 21-22, really flying in the face of what we thought would happen with COVID. And then you're just seeing mixed results. So flat, a lot of some revenue like sale tax is flat, and then some is slight increases, but we're seeing some decreases as well. Looking at the fund balance, this is our general fund picture currently in 22-23. So our audited general fund balance, and this is funds that are available for use. They're not restricted or non-spendable. $40.1 million, 21-22. In our budget, when we were sitting in this room last year in June, we had a $237,000 use of funds, negative 237, pretty small. And we also have currently this year planned use of fund balance. That includes, for example, the Housing Trust Fund. We just invested $500,000 out of the general fund for projects for that purpose. And we also had the LaBar Meadows Road project is $2.7 million. That's going to close, we're hoping, by the end of this month. You're going to see that at the June 27th board meeting, more detail about that. $2.67 million. And then we are seeing an increase this year, better than expected, because of salary savings, because of that property tax revenue being better than expected. We think we're going to be net positive about $2.65 million. The ultimate bottom line there is a reduction in general fund balance of $2.1 million, of $700,000. So we're looking at about a $39.1 million ending fund balance. You can see that in this projection of general fund balances. You see the $40.1 million, 6/30/22 actual. You can see the 6/30/23 estimate, $39.1 million. And again, following the budget, the fund balance policy that the board has adopted, as well as having our funds assigned for key areas of county operations and board priorities. This is how the funds are assigned at this point, or we're recommending. So general purpose, that's for economic emergencies and uncertainties. We typically have 10% of the total county general fund expenditures in that area. For emergencies and uncertainties, that's $10.6 million. The assigned for board priorities, we did recommend in your board workshop a change in title of that assignment. It used to be the Economic Development Infrastructure. We're using those funds more broadly for board priorities. So that is $3.4 million. That's essentially related to the TOT and builds up based on the TOT dollars. Facilities planning, 5-year plan, really drives that facility planning amount, $3 million. Similarly, there's a 5-year IS spend plan that drives that $1.4 million desired fund balance assignment. Pension contributions, $4.6 million. Justice services, really related to the many services that the sheriff needs for jail improvements as well as other projects. And then there's some other unassigned and assigned funds. And these are our general fund assignment change recommendations. We talked about these in the board workshop again, and I won't get into a lot of detail on these, but they're basically reflected in the that 39.1 million and how that's divided up. So moving to the next step, our 23-24, we're looking at starting that $39.1 million, 6/30/2023 balance. And then we're looking at a use of fund balance, $1,504,000. We're basically using those revenues for our information system and increase to that assignment, additional money for information systems, $1.2 million for economic development infrastructure. That's based on, and that should be board priorities. I apologize for that. The assigned for board priorities. So that's basically the tot that we've actually received, and we're just aligning that priority and that assignment with those funds. So basically a zero is the bottom line, the balanced general fund. So we're looking at ending at $39.1 million. Looking outside of the general fund, other operating funds, you can see here for 23-24 revenue, totaling $204 million, expenses totaling $209 million. These are our major areas of operation in the county, many of them. And you can see the variance there, or the difference between revenue and expense, and then the fund balance for estimated at 6/30/24. So we have essentially planned use of fund balance in a number of these roads, planned use of fund balance for various projects there. The CDA, that's mostly their building department, and that's a planned use of the building fund balance. Instead of increasing fees, they're using fund balance to kind of balance out the increase in fees there. Library, a slight use of fund balance there. The airport is balanced. Health and Human Service Agency, those are mostly, that includes the MHSA, Mental Health Service Act fund. We talked about the use of about $3.1 million there. So we're looking at about overall in HHSA negative $2.5 million. Again, planned, and then realignment, a slight reduction. So $5.6 million in these major operating funds. That gives us about $70.6 million of estimated fund balance. That's about 34% of the total expenditures, which that's a prudent fund balance that's going to hold those departments in good stead for future uncertainties. So looking at the revenues now for 23-24, a little more in depth. You can see here the pie chart that shows of the total county $349 million revenue. Again, 8.4% increase, $27 million. You can see the largest by far, basically 47%, the federal, state, intergovernmental. We talked about the importance of those funds for various core services and priorities. That large shares go to Health and Human Service Agency, Public Safety, including the Sheriff's Office and others, and the Roads Department. Taxes, those are largely property taxes, are the largest share of taxes, 22% increase, and that includes property tax, sales tax, and other taxes. So just a picture of the federal, state, and intergovernmental. You can see the trend there, pretty significant and dramatic in some ways. Just really showing you the revenue and the proactive efforts, not only proactive efforts on the part of the county to draw down and get federal revenue for our various programs, but also the mandates like we've been talking about. So that's partially driving some of these federal and state revenues. We talked about CalAIM and how that crosses behavioral health, social services, and other programs, but also in here is ARPA money. So in In 2021 and 21-22, approximately $20 million of our local funds came into they were federal and state money. So that shows up in those 2 years. That's also driving these numbers. Looking at discretionary revenue, general fund, I want to describe just kind of the importance of this. You know, we looked at the federal and state revenue and how that crosses many departments and is really important to the county. We also have other restricted monies in various departments, and the general fund discretionary revenues allow us to leverage those dollars, so provide funds to those departments to basically match or leverage other funds, as well as there's significant other county activity. I'll show you in a moment all the departments that are funded by general discretionary revenue, but these are at the discretion of the board to meet numerous needs in our community and priorities. So you can see there about 21% of the total county revenue is discretionary. That's about $72 million in 23-24, and property tax is 76% of that revenue. Just wanted to point out, sort of as we were looking at uncertainties in the future, and we had about 10% of our general fund is reserved essentially for uncertainties and economic emergencies. So back in the Great Recession, we had a cumulative impact on these discretionary revenues of about $13 million. So it just gives you a flavor of sort of the impact that a downturn could have on us in terms of needing general fund to backfill various services. Looking at that discretionary revenue, you can see how I described sort of how it's used and the importance, and you can see here that it is used for wildfire, broadband, other board objectives, housing, cannabis, and we see that as we go through the year, like that $500,000 of regional housing trust fund was from this discretionary revenue. Also includes public protection. At 60% of these discretionary revenues go toward Office of Emergency Services, the sheriff, district attorney, probation, conflict incident defense, ag services, planning, code compliance, cannabis compliance, and the grand jury. So a wide range of public protection. It also goes to general government, which is the second largest use of these funds at 36%. That's the clerk of the board, the CEO's office, the assessor, auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector, human resources, county council, purchasing, building and debt financing, election, facilities, and information systems. So looking at that, 76% of those revenues are property taxes. You can see the long-term chart over more than 30 years, and the average of all of the growth, annual growth of property tax has been 5.5%. And you can see there the trough, negative 7.5%, recession era, and we're basically currently hovering around that long-term average. We're expecting the average of 5.5% next year. We use the transfer taxes to predict our general fund growth. So when real estate is strong, transfer taxes are high. You're going to get increases in values of properties, and you're going to have the people that are long-term on Prop 13 are going to sell their property, and there's going to be a higher base value of those properties. So those kinds of things happen when we have a strong and active real estate market. So you can see there, we're seeing a decline in transfer taxes, and those transfer taxes are coincident with the economy. So for example, in 08-09, that was the bottom of the Great Recession. That was also the bottom of our transfer tax trend. So it follows the economy. However, in growth rates of property taxes, there's a 2-year lag. You can see the bottom there was 10-11, which was 2 years after 08-09. So the transfer tax changes are a predictor of property tax growth. And so we're just preparing ourselves for some softening of property tax growth. And you can see that partially going from a 7.1% this current year to 5.5% next year. And we expect that there's, at least in this particular factor, it's gonna play a part in future property taxes. Looking at some other 23-24 expenditures, expenditure by class, you can see there the pie chart. Our largest expenditure in the county, 38%, is salaries and benefits, and that increased by 8.1% or $10.5 million in 23-24. The second largest, at 31% of our budget, is services and supplies. The services and supplies really was driven by contracts. A large part of that was contracts. There's also, contracts was the biggest part of that. We also saw capital assets, 10% of the budget, an increase of 41%. We mentioned the driver of capital assets being largely the MERTS project. So the annual increase in salaries and benefits has been about 6.6% over the past 5 years. And these FTEs, I put this on here for a couple of reasons. One is just to demonstrate to us the efficiencies that the county has had in reorganizing and streamlining and using information systems. Also, what you don't see here is the contracts. If I layered on the value of contracts in the county, and essentially our partners, community partners delivering services for us in the community, that has shown the opposite trend, essentially. I mean, we've definitely saw large increases there as we reduce staffing at the county. And we're now seeing these targeted increases for the priorities and objectives that we've described: behavioral health for the CalAIM efforts, Department of Social Services, Health and Human Service Agency. Out of 28 increase, you see we're going from 844 to 872. That was about 18 of those FTEs, so largely related to the efforts that we described, improving our Medi-Cal and other health delivery in our community. A couple other ones are OES. We saw a 3 FTE increase in Office of Emergency Services. We mentioned the DSI workers, and facilities, we saw a 2 FTE increase. So targeted to meet certain needs of the county. I'm not going to get into details about this chart, but I will just say, as far as pension costs, it still is critical and important for us in the county and the CEO's office to continually monitor the health of our pension plan and try to make improvements whenever we can. And so we've taken these various actions over a period of time. We continue to pay down in a lump sum our unfunded liability to CalPERS, and we save probably $400,000 to $500,000 a year in doing that. And we're continuing to look at other efforts in terms of bolstering our pension. This gives you a picture of the health of our pension. So there are a couple of measures that give us an indication of the health of our pension plan. And you can see there on the left the funded ratio for 23 and 24. The funded ratio essentially tells us how much money we have in the bank relative to how much dollars of promises we made, both to retirees and our current staff. So how much do we have in the bank versus how much we owe to those employees? And we have in the bank 64% in 22-23, and we improved to 73% in 23-24. And the unfunded liability is the dollar measure, basically, of that gap between what we have in the bank and what we owe. So that translated into dollars, we had $239 million gap in unfunded liability in 22-23. We improved to 197 in 23-24. And that's largely driven by the investment returns. So there was I think it was a 21% positive investment return that drove these numbers. Last year, there was a negative 6.1 investment return in 21-22. That's going to be reflected in our next year's numbers, so they're going to probably deteriorate. So you can see the increase in our pension costs, and we are, as part of our pension management policy and planning for stabilization, we have a pension trust fund. There's about $3.8 million in that fund right now. And the board has also set aside and assigned, this is partly what that assignment in the general fund would do, is to help us to stabilize those pension costs over time. So you can see that light green area. We could use those resources over the period of time described there to stabilize our pension costs. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of some other challenges that are ahead. One is state and federal budgets. The state budget process is close to being at an end. The May revise occurred on May 12th. The legislative budget proposal was done just a few days ago. The governor it's going through various conferences and committees to reconcile this budget, and it must be signed by the governor by July 1st. There's greatly reduced revenue assumptions in that budget between a $32 and a $35 billion budget problem. The resolution and how that impacts their budget is delaying certain expenditures. There's certain trigger cuts and funding shifts, like shifting funds to bond funding from general funding. But it's primarily focused on one-time and temporary augmentations that occurred in previous budgets. The state budget does not assume a recession scenario. And the federal budget, the debt ceiling deal is complete a few weeks ago, and budget talks continue. It's going to be a rocky road to get to an adopted federal budget by the end of September, and we'll see how that goes. That debt ceiling, there was a big threat to our ARPA money, unobligated funds to be taken back by the feds through that debt ceiling deal, and we were held unscathed. It was a great relief in our ARPA money that we received, that local money. So no major impacts to the county services at this point. We're continuing to be vigilant and review. Certainly sustainability of programs given our dependence on federal and state money. So our recession outlook is still uncertain. It's uncertain in general. The forecasts vary, and there's still wide-ranging expectations. We're not sure which direction our economy is going to go. Some of the headwinds or challenges are high inflation, although it's reduced to 4% year to year from up to 9% in previous months. The Federal Reserve held off their tightening, but they're expected to continue to tighten in coming months. However, is sort of opposite. They're loosening their essentially banking policy for more growth. They're not having the inflationary issues. And here at home, we're definitely kind of in the middle there, and we're seeing bank failures, which is a challenge. So some challenges there. The stock market, as far as positives, I should say the stock market performance has been strong. There's almost 30% increase in the NASDAQ, for example. The job market has been very stable, and we're still at some of our historical low unemployment rates, and we have continued moderate economic growth. So the county budget does not include a recession. We talked to you how we're poised in the general fund and other department funds in case there is a downturn. We do have the resources to weather a recession, but we continue to be vigilant about it. And we will continue to bring in and leverage state and federal dollars and invest in our future with that prudence in mind. That's what I have for you. We want to give, again, thanks to the Budget Subcommittee. It's been a pleasure working with Ed Schofield and Hardy Bullock. And our Auditor Controller has been hand in hand with us along the way, partnering with us through this budget process. We had our interim budget analyst, Sarah Hollyhead. And again, thanks to everyone in this room has been so instrumental in making these budgets what they are and providing the services to our community while being very fiscally sound in managing. And that's all I have, and I'm happy to entertain any questions of the board.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very good presentation, and I also would like to thank all the department head staff that participated in the budget hearings that Hardy and I participated in. So this is a public hearing for the purpose of hearing written and oral comments from the public. So the only comments that we will be taking will be those that are in relation to the budget. And before I open the public hearing, I want to come to our board and see if they have any comments or questions before opening. Mr. Vice Chair, would you like to open it?
Thank you. No, I don't have any questions. Thanks Martin and Barry for all your hard work. Thanks to all the staff members, all the budget units that came prepared. We spent a lot of time, I think 17 days or so in total, reviewing it, and I was just really pleased with the amount of detail and the answers to the questions we had. I feel fortunate to have gone through it with you and your experience in so many of these. Yeah, that's about it. I don't have any questions. I'll open it up to my colleagues. I'm sure have additional questions.
Thank you, Artie. Heidi?
Thank you for this great presentation. I think probably every year I understand more faster, and I feel like I got a pretty good handle of it this year. It was a great presentation. I appreciate Martin. I'd asked Martin to walk me through the changes from last year to this separately, and that was very helpful. So to me, that's what triggers questions mostly, big increases or big drops. So I understand understand, and they make sense to me, the changes that we've had this year. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, and how impressive it is that in this state right now of a very rocky federal budget and a very rocky state budget, we are stable and prepared for the future. That is huge, especially for a rural county. So just kudos to everyone for keeping that fiscal stability in mind, and feel very fortunate to be in a county where we make that a priority. Thanks for everybody.
Thank you, Heidi. Might want to shout out to Barry, too, who is very much involved with all of our process. Barry. Sue?
Well, thanks. I don't have any questions right now, but thank you for the presentation. It's so interesting to go through the budget book, and I think because it gives us such a different insight always to what's going on in all our departments, and it's just so helpful. I always appreciate that. You guys do a great job, Barry, and appreciated our meeting we had ahead of time for this, so I don't have any questions right now.
Thank you, Sue. And first time through, Lisa?
No questions or comments, thank you.
Very good. Then at this time, I will open this up to our public hearing. And when you come forward, you will have 3 minutes. If you have questions, I'd like to have you direct the questions to me, and then we will decide, and we will have them answered by our staff. And again, this is pertaining only to the budget. This is not a general public comment period. So if you'll come forward and give us your name. I see one. Tom?
Good morning. My name is Tom Durkin. I'm District 4. I'm impressed. This is an amazing job. I did have one comment on page 122 or 173. It reads, review the county's regulations and policies to ensure the county's requirements for housing for homeless persons do not pose a barrier to development of affordable housing or achievable housing. I understand the county's policy is housing first and build for zero. So I'm wondering why you are prioritizing housing for people who are already housed when we have people who are not living in housing right now. As an advocate, I am concerned about what happens to homeless people, and I think the more you prioritize housing for people that are already housed, you're cutting out the homeless people. So that's my comment. So no question per se, just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Very good, Tom. Thank you. Michael?
Hi, Mr. Schofield. For clarity, I think I would like to see more or some information on the surpluses that exist in each department and how the surpluses have either grown or shrank, and how those surpluses are applied to the following year's budget. The other area that I'm interested in seeing more information provided, and maybe you can ask that question, is it looks like we're going from 844 staff to 872. It's also my understanding that we've significantly increased contracted labor. So I'd be interested to understand what those numbers have been and what they are now and what they're projected for the future as far as contracted labor. I'd like to see a little more being responsible with the departments being responsible with presenting their budgets for their wish lists of things they want, so that we're seeing that at the beginning of the fiscal year versus throughout the middle, going through the year as far as amendments to their budgets. And like one that stuck out to me as being kind of an expensive item that was added to a budget would have been, I think it was $300,000 for a vehicle for the sheriff department. I think that those kinds of items should be planned and see them already in the beginning of the year, that that's a need they're going to have later in the year. Bicycles that are battery operated, or RVs, or what else? Motorcycles. I mean, those kinds of things. It's those little big ticket items that you would think that could be presented in the budget as part of their wish list at the beginning of the year, and not part of an amendment that has less public transparency in its presentation. I'd like to see some sort of a transparency process for the funds that the CEO office is spending. For example, I understand that she can spend up to $50,000 without having BOS approval, but it would be nice to see some sort of a transparency process for when she spends up to $50,000 on a more relative real-time basis, not at the end of the year or several months later, so that there's some transparency in what she is spending as she's spending it or has spent it. And I don't want to be real specific about what I'm talking about, but I just think there should be a little more transparency in those funds and how they're spent, more on real time. I think that's everything. Thank you.
Chair Schofield, just for clarification, as CEO, my spending authority is $25,000, and our purchasing agent has up to $50,000 before contracts come to the boards. For correction to the record.
Thank you,
Allison.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Well, you just had 3 minutes, Mike.
I had one question I was hoping you would ask.
Okay.
That was,
All
okay.
right. Yeah. What I would like to do is I'll go through the total public comment, and then I'll go back to those questions. Is that okay? Is there any other public comment? Diana? No. Madam Clerk, is there any written comment or online calls?
We have no callers and no written comments.
Okay, then very good. Martin, I'm going to go back to the questions that we just received. A little comment on procedure with surplus on each department. Comment perhaps on the staffing level and how we've gotten there, and also a little explanation on contract labor. I think the CEO's office, perhaps Allison, just a brief comment on what your procedure is with that. And I do want to comment, too, that, there are many issues that do come towards us, and we look at what is coming, what are the problems that are coming, what are some of the concerns we have. I look back at Ryan as a good example of this with some of our huge projects with our mental health, et cetera, programs. I know, for instance, the large purchase of the Sheriff's Department just recently. We asked the same thing. Why didn't that come forward? And in that particular case, it was a case of, hey, it's available now. It's going to be much, much more costly if we wait for the process. So that's why it comes to us directly rather than through the budget process. So those things do happen. They're going to occur. So Martin, can I give it back to you with these questions?
Thank you, Chair Schofield. And members of the board. Yeah, I'll answer these to the best of my ability. And yeah, the first one I think you mentioned was surpluses in each fund and how they've grown and what they're intended to be used for. I mean, definitely the departments have, very rigorous. I think about Health and Human Services and the Community Development Agency. about the fund balance usage in those specific areas. They have very robust and rigorous tracking and monitoring of their various budget, their various fund balances and uses of those funds. For this budget, typically it comes in sort of toward the tail end of those projections, meaning we don't see in our budget process all of the history and all of the plans. However, we do, like the Mental Health Service Act was one of the largest uses of fund balance. And we know that there's a 3-year plan, so they bring it to the budget subcommittee that they've had a 3-year plan for Mental Health Service Act. They had planned to spend those funds down. So, for example, they are definitely keeping track of that. Similarly, for the solid waste, we saw major McCourtney Road transfer station improvement. That fund has been accumulating dollars for this specific purpose. They've come to the board pretty frequently over the last few years describing what the project is and how they're going to use the fund. So although it's not specifically presented in detail in these budgets, it is throughout the year and incumbent upon the departments to keep more detail about those fund balances.
So, Mr. Polt and Chair Schofield, I would just like to add to that. So, Mr. Taylor's question in terms of how can the public monitor the fund balances, that is found in the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, otherwise known as the CAFR, which is administered by our auditor, and that will specifically show special revenue funds for all of our departments. I also want to mention in terms of why do we have fund balance, and especially in the health and human services arena, the fluctuation in allocations, the mandates that come down, some that are unexpected mid-fiscal year. We want to make sure in terms of providing these important safety net services that we're not just ramping up in good times and then dissolving services, and that we have continuity of services. In doing that, that means we need to maintain healthy fund balance.
And I also point out that there was one, I believe, in the CDA department where instead of raising fees, we went into the fund balance a bit.
True. Yeah, thank you, CEO Lehman. The second one I'll touch on is we talked a little bit about the contract process, and as far as the CEO's authority, we have the CEO authority for contracts up to $25,000, the purchasing agent authority up to $50,000, and the board authority anywhere beyond $50,000, so $50,000 plus one. We do have consistent, essentially, administrative practices for all of those contracts. So there is a series of steps that need to be taken. We have a purchasing policy that describes, for example, there's a framework for that. Once those contracts are executed by the relevant body, all of the payments have to go through the auditor controller's office. So every invoice typically they get signed by a program manager. So if there's a contract in a department, whatever department that may be, there would be a assigned project manager or program manager. And usually that person's the person who knows most about the activities of that contract. So legal, for example, Kid Elliott is typically, if there's a legal contract with an attorney, most times they're the ones who understand attorney and legal activities the most. So a lot of times it will go through their office and they would sign the invoices for those contracts. But every one of those contracts does follow the purchasing policy, whatever size contract that is. So those are some of the frameworks. There's multiple checks and balances as far as when there's a payment. That invoice is signed by the project manager. They must then go through the auditor controller's office for payment. They make sure that those steps have been followed, that it's following the purchasing policy. If there's a board resolution or a purchasing agent requisition. So a lot of steps have to happen in order for the actual expenditure. And the final thing I'll say is there's a check and balance on the board level as far as the board authorization, and that is through the State Budget Act. The board must approve essentially expenditures that occur in our county. So as we're sitting here today, you're approving a budget for a certain expenditure within a department, within a certain fund. And if there's a change in that, for example, an increase in those expenditures, we must come to the board with a 4/5 vote to increase the appropriation for any activity, for activities within the county. So that's another sort of way that we must come before the board in every case.
Okay, and I just comment a bit on the staffing level. I think a lot of the FTE positions when they come in have a lot to do with us up here. And when we set certain priorities that maybe weren't there in the past, that usually has a commitment of people that go with it. But then we have to look at the sustainability of it too. And we look at a 5-year process on that. So that, because there is, this year there was a pretty substantial increase in the number of people, FTEs. And I can tell you there are within our departments needs that are not given to those departments simply because of the sustainability and the financial situation within that department. So Allison, you want to give a brief kind of summary as to how you deal with the amount of money and how you deal with those particular contracts?
So the budget is prepared by staff and it's reviewed by the budget subcommittee by budget units to provide that direction for the next fiscal year. Each department within their budget administer contracts to meet those objectives. Those contracts then are coordinated with the centralized within our purchasing agent, Desiree Belding, who then follows the county policies. We also work with the budget subcommittee when there are sometimes contracts that increase mid-year or they're unexpected, where maybe we make a purchase such as an emergency generator that then comes to the board, or in Health and Human Services when there's been increased services and when we bring a contract back to the board that may be retro. And when doing so, that information is included in our staff reports.
Okay. And I was referring to your discretionary.
So my discussion is up to $25,000, and many of the contracts that go like for board initiatives go through the specific departments where they are the champion or the leader of that initiative.
Okay. And I reflect back on my own time with the fairgrounds. Artie, you can probably reflect onto your past there too, but I know at the fairgrounds with a $2 or $3 million budget, I had a discretionary amount of like $10,000. Otherwise, you just get inundated with some of these smaller figures. So is there any other, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any other public comments?
Well, I just have a question about the Lou Edwards group contract. I think it was originally...
I don't think we'll get into the details, Pauline.
Okay, but I'm just asking because it went through several amendments during that time, but those amendments or increases never came before the board until after the first of the year. So it seemed like it was kind of like a hot potato moving around with increases that went from $10,000 to $70,000. I mean, how did all that happen without your knowledge?
Thank you. You wish to respond to that?
I could respond to that.
Okay. Fine.
So the Lou Edwards that Ms. Halstead is referencing was a board-directed initiative in terms of looking at viable and sustainable revenue source for emergency preparedness. When we entered into the first phase of the contract with Lou Edwards, it was for public opinion polling as well as a community survey and outreach. We then received further direction from the board in terms of placing that as a ballot measure, which increased the contract. And then the election wasn't certified till mid-December, then bringing the contract to the board in January. This was administered by our purchasing agent, and Des is here to answer any specific questions. Invoices over $50,000 were not paid until we received authorization from the Board of Supervisors.
Very good. Thank you, Allison. So at this point, I'm going to close the public comment portion of this, and I'm going to bring this subject back to the board for any further comments or questions before we proceed. Hardy, you had some questions?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the staffing levels, and it's one of the areas that I looked at closely during the budget process, and we have inside your packet, you'll see staffing level changes with percentages to changing within that budget unit. One of the things that came to mind, and I don't know, Martin, if we have access to the Gantt chart with the annual budget increases from 2009 to the current. And I think, was there one that was superimposed with the staffing levels and the budget? I believe.
Thank you, Chair and Supervisor Bullock. Are we talking within this presentation?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was one staffing chart, and it did not have the budget superimposed, but I can go to that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I guess what I'm trying to get at, the doubling of the budget since 2008 and 9, we don't have commensurate staffing level increases, which is fine. We didn't double our staff. Actually, we went the other way. And understanding that we have these two priorities, right? We have emergency response, things that come up in our community that we're asked to respond to. That could be homelessness, it could be fire, it could be climate-related changes, it could be snowstorms, it could be green waste. So we're asked to make immediate responses to those. Oh yeah, perfect, thank you. And then we have responses, community-driven responses, things like recreation, economic development, homelessness, climate change. So we're being asked by the community to respond to these. In the full-time equivalents here, obviously, with the doubling of our budget since 08-09, obviously we're not doubling these, but we do have number of downstream effects when we get grant funding. So if we get grant funding streams to administer contracts for green waste, or grant funding for homelessness, or building homeless service amenities, we may have a grant that handles the construction of that project and the administration of that grant, but we don't have grants and we don't have additional staffing members to handle the downstream effects. For example, impacts on your office or auditor controller's office or executive staff or board of supervisors office or anything else. So I just would like to bring some awareness to the staffing levels, because as you put here, we're only Placer is lower out of our commensurate comparison counties, and I think you can remind me, Yuba County, Sacramento, Butte, Sutter. Can you tell us the equivalent comparison counties? We usually use the same ones for
our. Let's see, Mr. Anderson did this analysis, but I believe it's Yuba, Mendocino, Humboldt, Sutter, San Luis Obispo,
Yep.
and Sonoma, possibly.
Something. The comparison count. Yep. Thank you. The comparison counties essentially were lower than all of those, and so I just want to bring awareness to the fact that when responding to the needs of the community on an emergency basis, it could include fire, snowstorms, et cetera, or the community-driven priorities that the board creates, those require staffing. And in my opinion, we are lean and mean, and it takes staffing to get these things accomplished on behalf of the community. So I just wanted to point that out, because while our budget's doubled, the staffing has not nearly kept pace with what we're asking, and the changes to staffing levels also aren't matched with the changes in CPI increases over the last 10 years as well. So just wanted to point that out.
Very good. Any others? Heidi? Sue? Lisa? None. Okay. Then at this point, Martin, we're going to give this back to you. There are certain items that you will be pulling. The board has the opportunity to pull any item that they would like to see out of the budget also. Martin, can I give back to you?
Thank you, Chair Schofield. So as far as pulling budgets from the consent list, so what we typically do is I'll pull certain items, and these are going to be the budgets that will be discussed in the fee hearing. So we'll pull those after the fee hearing. We'll ask the board if, we'll ask the board then to have a motion of intent to adopt those budgets. So the ones that we're going to pull for those purposes are the airport, because it's discussed in the fee hearing, facilities budget. We have the public guardian, which is the adult services administration budget, and the treasurer tax collector budget. So essentially 4 budgets we're asking to pull from consent so that we can discuss those more in the fee hearing. And the library, thank you. Thanks, Barry. So 5 budgets.
Okay. Any other budgets? No. Very good. Then, what I'd like to do is call for a motion of intent and a second to adopt the budgets remaining on the consent list and roll call, and follow with a roll call vote. Can I hear a motion?
So moved.
Motion Supervisor Hall.
Second.
Seconded Supervisor Swarthout. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Chair. District 4?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 1?
Yes.
District 5?
Yes.
And District 2?
Yes. So at this point, it looks like we're going to take a short break to go into our sanitation district, and it is a scheduled item for 10:30, so we'll take a 9-minute break. All right, at this time, we are going to reconvene as the Nevada County Sanitation District Number 1. And I introduced this item. This is the scheduled item. And I'm going to turn the floor over again to Martin on this, who'll preside the presentation regarding the sanitation district.
Thank you, Chair Schofield, members of the board. Tricia Tillotson, our Community Development Agency Director, is here to discuss the sanitation district budget with you. Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning. So the sanitation district, number 1 for Nevada County, the mission is really to administer, operate, and maintain wastewater systems and treatment facilities in a safe, efficient, and cost-effective manner for our customers, all in compliance with local, state, and federal requirements. So to do this, we partner with our Nevada County Department of Environmental Health, the California Department of Public Health, California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Federal Environmental Protection Agency rules, regulations, certifications, and permits, for example. And all of this is so that we can properly manage our 10 Nevada County sanitation district zones. So those zones include Lake Wildwood, Lake of the Pines, North San Juan, Gold Creek, Penn Valley, Mountain Lakes Estates, Cascade Shores, Eden Ranch, Higgins Village, and Valley Oak Court, although that's part of Penn Valley now. I forgot to mention, too, we also have our Public Works Director here, Heba El Gundi, and also our Wastewater Programs Manager, Brad Torres, with us if there's any additional questions. But I'm going to quickly just go over some of the major accomplishments from last year and then our goals for this next year. Our accomplishments from last year, we did update our sewer system management plan for all 10 of our zones. We upgraded the SCADA control equipment at both the Lake Wildwood and Lake of the Pines wastewater treatment plants. We also continued to bring in work that we've historically contracted out, and our staff under Brad's guidance really did a great job implementing projects and improvements in a very cost-effective manner. The crews also cleaned almost 300,000 feet of gravity sewer line and then videoed almost 30,000 feet of line as well. And this is part of, again, our sewer system management plan, just to make sure that we're maintaining our systems and looking for any issues. For this next year, our goals include increasing public awareness. This is through all kinds of different informational programs. We do tours as well. We also have an advisory committee, which I just want to put out there. We're always looking for folks to join, so please, if you know anyone who's interested, let them know. And so that's just a little bit of our public awareness, but we also want to continue to identify critical infrastructure projects and funding sources. So we've been very successful this last year looking at other funding sources to supplement our minimal rates that we take in, and that's been really helping us get out some capital projects. A lot of that's through outside grant funding, and then we're continuing to seek out and support future connected users, because the more connections we have to our existing systems, the more cost effective it is per person. We're also effectively operating and maintaining our sanitation district wastewater collection systems. So we continue to review our district code and update it as needed. Our goal is 300,000 feet of line to clean per year, and then also to conduct our video inspections, kind of like I highlighted with this past year. We're always also looking at improving and implementing inflow and infiltration issues, and this is something that Brad and his team do a very good job at, but it's always a never-ending story, if you will. And then in addition to our planned maintenance and infrastructure improvements, we also plan to purchase trucks and equipment this year. We see here also on the screen is our revenues and expenditures for each different kind of spending category, if you will, including administration, risk management, and then all of the zones are laid out here. We do have about $12 million in revenue projected and almost $11 million in expenditures. Some of that additional revenue is purposely being saved for future projects. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Board, any questions? None? Trish, if you would for me. Which one is the Higgins, the village, the new connection? And how does that relate to the older existing district?
Sure. So Higgins Village is really, it's become part of the Lake of the Pines zone, if you will. Although we still have the two different zones identified in our rates, you'll notice that the rates were brought to be the same essentially. And this is what we did in Penn Valley too. So we had Penn Valley, Lake Wildwood, and then also the Valley Oak. And so those were combined with the wastewater, the sewer line that we put in. So all their rates are being equalized, if you will. And that was in the rate study that we passed about a year or a year and a half ago. So the same things happening with Higgins Village is that's really, now that it's connected to our Lake of the Pines system, it's being served by the same system, the rates can be adjusted to be more comparable.
So the Higgins Village Zone 11, though, is that still in existence?
It's still in existence as a zone, just because that's how it was established. But again, it's connected to Lake of the Pines, so they're starting to pay for the Lake of the Pines system now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I see that there was 91.3 generated and 100 in expenses, will that go away? Will be encompassed in the other?
No, so it's shown separately, but it's really part of Lake of the Pines now, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you, Trish. I should have known that.
Oh, no worries. It's complicated. Yeah.
Artie?
Yeah, thank you. Two questions, and they're unrelated, but Cascade Shores obviously is expenditure over revenue, but we did a rate modification to that zone. Was that in 22 or was that in early 23?
That was in 22. And so, yeah, we did the rate modification, and you'll see in our budget documents, and Brad can jump in if he has more, but we did adjust their rates, and so there are increases built in that. We're still projecting after 5 years needing to take another look at all of our zones, but Cascade Shores is one of those areas that we continue to be concerned about, just because there's only so many connections. And so that's an area, for example, where it might be mutually beneficial for folks to connect to the system, especially since a lot of the homes were built in the 70s. The septic systems are getting old, and they could start to fail. So by them connecting to the system, they're going to get great wastewater treatment, and then it'll actually help spread the cost.
Of course. And then will we be, after that 5 year, will we be at a kind of a balanced budget, so to speak, for that zone 8 again?
We project a balanced budget for almost every zone. Cascade Shores, though, is one of those zones that we're concerned with. So what that means is I would expect today, sitting here, that in 5 years, we're probably going to look at more increases for that area.
Okay.
Now, could things change? Sure. And so that's something why and that's why we monitor these budgets annually. And then every 5 years, we do a comprehensive look. And that means also looking at our future plans and what's needed for the treatment plant there. And that's how you determine, what your rates will need to be.
Sure. Okay, great, thanks. The second question, kind of unrelated, the kind of unauthorized, the exposure we have for unauthorized discharges when we have high stormwater events, infiltration events. And because we have multiple 100-year events every year now, it's like, oh, we have a 100-year event. It's coming again next year. And so I guess my question is are there grant funding streams coming from the state? Because obviously they're the jurisdiction that looks at a lot of our activity. Are there grant funds that we can go after to kind of proactively enhance capacity to prevent those occurrences?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I know Brad and his team and Public Works are constantly looking at. With the Lake Wildwood improvements that we made at the plant there, some of that was intentionally to increase capacity, right? And I shouldn't say increase the overall capacity, was increasing the capacity of the choke point. And so that's where a lot of our, and this is typical, there's other wastewater plants where there's some improvements we can do. I'll go back to Cascade Shores again. That's an example of a plant. It's a very small tertiary plant, and so if we add in additional storage, that can greatly help us weather the storm, if you will. And so we're always looking for grant funds, and there's a lot of typical grant fund sources that we use out there. And there's other things we can look at too if it comes to the point where we need to get a loan, that kind of thing.
For new construction, so for example, if you wanted to build workforce housing and you could bond against it and create another sanitary district zone to support that, should all the numbers work out?
Yeah, if you had to create a new zone, that's always something you can consider. But, if you had workforce housing, I'll just say in the Lake of the Pines area, and that caused a need for us to update the wastewater plant. There's many different kinds of financing that could be considered, from grants to bonds to loans. It kind of, runs the gamut on the options.
Thank you.
Very good.
I just would be glad when our loan at Lake Wall was paid off. I'll be a happy camper. So, because there's always this maintenance and new restrictions and new things that come up from the state on a regular basis. So this is one department that's really important to have some sort of a fund balance to cover some of these kinds of issues. So this is the exact reason why.
Absolutely.
Okay, at this time, I'll open the public comment portion of this hearing, and this is on the Sanitation District Number 1, comments only. Is there any public comments? Madam Clerk, is there any written or online?
I see no written comments and no calls right now, Chair.
Very good. Then at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing portion. And I would entertain a motion of intent to adopt the Nevada County Sanitation District Number 1 budget totaling $10,841,510.
So moved.
Motion Supervisor Hook.
Second.
Second Supervisor Bullock. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. District 4.
Yes.
District 3.
Yes.
District 1.
Yes.
District 5.
Yes.
And District 2.
Yes. Thank you, Board. Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Brad. Ebba. All right, now we have another 3 minutes, and we will reconvene as the Board of Supervisors of Nevada County. Oops. All right, we will reconvene the special meeting of the Board of Supervisors of Nevada County. And our next item is a scheduled public hearing to establish fee schedules per the county's consolidated user fee schedules, which includes multiple county departments. And Martin, I'll turn that over to you for explanation.
Thank you, Chair Schofield, members of the board. We have Barry Anderson, our Senior Management Analyst in the CEO's office. And I neglected to give Barry, I think, the credit due earlier in our budget, intent to adopt budgets. Barry's really been working tirelessly along with other staff, but I definitely want to give him an individual call out for his participation in the budget and also in this user fee presentation. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Martin. Chair Schofield, members of the board, as mentioned, I'm Barry Anderson, Management Analyst in the CEO's office, and I will be presenting today on the consolidated user fee update. I'll just start by saying, so we've been operating for the last several years under previous direction from the board to consolidate and sort of adopt a more streamlined approach to fee setting. And so the process of building an all-county consolidated fee schedule began in 2019 with Resolution 19-242. That was the first resolution. It included a group of, but not all, county departments. But importantly, it also established a CPI, Consumer Price Index, mechanism for updating fees and providing annual adjustments. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here, but it's important to note that then additional schedules for additional county departments were brought on over the next 2 years with a full consolidated schedule adopted last fiscal year. I'd also like to talk about, at this point, discussing what goes into bringing a fee to your board for adoption. It's an essential part of this process is review by what's known as the User Fee Review Group, or UFERG, as I'll call it from here on out. That's a group that consists of the Auditor Controller's Office, County Council, and County Executive Office. And really, so the intent of charging user fees is to ensure that the recovery of costs associated with the delivery of services. And the UFERG works basically to ensure that the rates set meet that sort of reasonable standard and have a basis in the actual cost to ensure that we are recovering costs, the cost to deliver services, but not overcharging, ensuring reasonableness. So that's what the UFERG is and what it's charged with doing. There's a robust process involved that includes time studies and actual cost evaluation, and then final review by the UFERG before passing on a recommendation to your board. And then, where applicable, as sort of mentioned, we have the CPI adjustment factor. Again, where applicable, certain fees don't receive that, but we'll talk a little bit about that now. So it is important to note that not all fees receive a CPI adjustment. Some fees are either statutorily defined, or a department may even choose to prioritize accessibility over cost recovery. We have some programs like the library or maybe elections where it makes more sense to charge a fee that doesn't, provide a barrier to access. But in most cases where cost recovery is an important consideration, using a CPI allows for an annual adjustment that sort of without the CPI, or that means we don't need to undergo the rigorous process I was just talking about, the time study, the full cost evaluation. We would otherwise have to do that every single year and do that for all departments, right? And so using the CPI allows us to ensure that costs are keeping pace with the actual cost of delivering the services. And then another important sort of consideration is that the CPI adjustment only is applicable for 2 years following the initial time study or the initial adoption of the base rate for a department. So
The UFERG reviews a fee, establishes the base fee, and if there's a CPI that's applicable, it will apply for the following 2 fiscal years and then be brought back to the UFERG for that comprehensive fee update. And that allows us to, again, it reduces the administrative burden while also ensuring that every 3 years we go through a reset to make sure that we're not falling behind or overcharging. And that sort of gets to some of the questions that came up earlier about how do we ensure that we're not adding too much fund balance, right? We go through this process to ensure that we're collecting the appropriate fee for services that are provided. The index that we use for CPI is the urban wage earners and clerical workers in California. So for the period from December 2021 to December 2022 is what we use for this fee schedule. That is a 5.29% increase, and that is applied where applicable. And then you have your statutory fees, which are updated, those as the statutes allow. So the proposed fee update before you today includes the following changes over last year's adopted schedule. You have a comprehensive UFERG reviewed updates for the departments in information and general services. As Martin mentioned earlier, that's the airport and facilities specifically. We also have the library, public guardian, and treasurer tax collector. It also applies that CPI, as I just described, to all other fees where applicable, with 2 exceptions, and these are important to note. So in CDA, we have cannabis compliance and code compliance, and both of those departments had, in last year's resolution, an exception to the CPI defined. So 7.2% over this year. It was last year, this year, and again next year was defined as the percentage increase to be applied, and 6% for code compliance. Excuse me, and that was done in order to avert a sort of drastic 1-year fee increase that would have otherwise had to have been applied last year. So we're phasing in the needed cost or fee increase to cover the cost of delivering those services. And so that's why those 2 programs are exceptions to that CPI. And then you have a new resolution. So we will be rescinding last year's resolution and adopting a new one with a full schedule of county fees. Again, I'd like to reiterate that all of these fees have been reviewed by the UFERG. And additionally, it's worth noting that the fees in the proposed schedule are included in the proposed budget, which we just presented, and were discussed with the budget subcommittee during that process. So this table is intended to show, so we have, as you can see, this is a list A through M of all the departments, or rather programs with fee schedules, and a description of what is changing or not changing therein. So, as mentioned, we have the comprehensive fee updates for the programs that I previously mentioned. We also have CPI and statutory adjustments in the assessors, clerk of the board, and CDA departments. We have a statutory update in public health vital records. And then, interestingly, of note is that animal control, clerk recorder, elections, and sheriff have all actually reached the end of their CPI adjustment cycle, as I discussed a few slides ago. However, given administrative concerns, primarily due to the turnover in the chief fiscal administrative officer position in the sheriff department and the new position in the clerk recorder's office, as well as the timing of elections, right, prohibiting us to do a comprehensive fee study in elections, we have postponed that comprehensive fee update for those departments. That's intended to be done in this coming fiscal year, and as such, we are proposing no change to their fees. So the fees will be kept static from what they were in the current year, because we did not have the opportunity to do that full fee study and UFERG review process that we talked about. So the baseline will be reestablished in the coming year, but yeah, rather than continue to apply a CPI, we're keeping them static. And then lastly, in the case of probation, all of the fees on that schedule are statutory, and there are no changes to the statute. So there's no change there. And some summaries for you just about the fee schedules that are being updated. We have in Information and General Services was last presented in 2019. We were talking about fees, and there are fees related to this, to the use of these facilities, the airport and other county facilities. These fees are primarily set by market rate comparison. So that's an interesting and sort of anomaly to these fees, but we go through that process with the UFERG. Some of the fees in this schedule are were added. We have some new county facilities. We have some sort of new services provided at the airport. There's some slight distinction. You know, we have like airport storage versus airport hangars. So there's some very sort of small adjustments in that regard. And then otherwise, that CPI adjustment does not apply to these fees. With regard to the library, they were last updated in 2020. However, the library is choosing to remove several fees from their fee schedule. These are fees that the library typically does not charge anyways, that were on the previous fee schedule. And this sort of fits in with what I was saying earlier about sometimes there's a reason to make accessibility a priority over collecting a fee. And so that's the approach there. We've reviewed it. There's minimal to no fiscal impact with this change. Again, in this case, CPI adjustment does not apply. With Public Guardian, the fees were last updated in 2019, so they were due for a base reset. Most of the fees in this schedule are statutory or direct cost recovery. However, for conservatorship, that is based on an hourly rate. A rate study was performed and reviewed by the UFERG, but there are certain challenges or sort of limitations to that fee study, and we plan to revisit it again in the coming fiscal year. So they'll get another reset next fiscal year. And then CPI adjustment will not apply for that reason. And then lastly, the Treasurer Tax Collector was last updated in 2020. They were added to the fee schedule last year in fiscal year 22-23. Most of their fees are statutory, again, or direct cost recovery, but they do have some hourly rate fees. So we did, based on their last full update in 2020, we brought them forward, did the full UFERG fee study, and actually resulted in a reduced hourly rate, went from $111.05 to $107.30. Again, that is the intention of this process, is to revisit those and reset the base hourly rate to ensure that we're not outpacing actual cost. And so you can see that in effect here. And going forward, the annual CPI will only apply to that hourly rate. Otherwise, we're talking statutory or direct cost recovery. And those are the only sort of refreshes or comprehensive updates. Everything else, as I mentioned, is either CPI adjusted or statutory in nature. And with that, I would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Barry. If I could, one clarification with the sheriffs. When you say their base would be looked at again next year, you're talking 24, 25?
Correct. Over the course of fiscal year 23-24, we will be evaluating all of the departments that are due for a refresh, and so they'll get looped into that process in the coming fiscal year with at this time next year when we're presenting fees for 24-25. We will have that process completed.
Very good. And the UFERG.
Correct, yeah.
That's great. Very,
UFERG.
who would have known? But we want to thank the UFERG committee for the work that they put into this. There's a lot of fees here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Board, any questions? Supervisor Bullock?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I just had one quick question on our budget portal website. Can we make sure the updated fee schedules are in there? I can't seem to find it. Just making sure that the public can access the updated fee schedules on the budget portal on our website. Did you? Is it under proposed or other key documents?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
We will make
check
sure
on
that it gets
Okay.
there.
Thank you.
open the public hearing then at this point to the public. If there's any questions, please come down and give us your name. And this is any comment or questions on the fee schedule. Diana?
Morning, Board. Diana Gamzon, Executive Director of the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. And I want to express my gratitude to your leadership for recognizing cannabis as a core service under economic development. And I also want to acknowledge the amount of resources and time that has gone into creating a new cannabis program many years ago, and the continued work, the policy work that happened this past year, tax work, grant development. I also want to thank, I had some questions about the cannabis budget, and I want to thank Martin and Alicia for both working with me to answer those questions. And our cannabis program this past year, we continue to be the highest percentage of farmers in the entire state that has the highest percentage of organic cannabis farmers. That's still close to 20 or over 25% in the entire state are located here in Nevada County. And those are officially certified by the state of California to be organic cannabis farmers. And then most recently, last month at the Emerald Cup is basically the Oscars for cannabis. Nevada County cannabis farmers won top prizes throughout. So we're really proud to see where our small cannabis farmers are going and the recognition that we're getting in the state and as well national press. That's the 7.2% increase on fees this year, as there was last year, and there will be next year. So this is a close to or over 20% increase. And I think that just in the future, as there are changes to the cannabis fee structure, if we can, I understand this resolution passed last year, but just involving us in that process is really helpful so that we can best inform the industry so that they know what expectations are coming, and we can help work with the industry on that is what our request would be. Also, I noted that in the budget or in the fees, both building, events, and cannabis all have a complex calculation for the CPI. I just wanted to better understand what that meant, a complex calculation of the CPI. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Any other comments? Madam Clerk, any written or online?
We have no calls on the fee schedule and no written comments.
Very good. Then we'll close the public comment portion of this. And at this point, bring it back. Are there any other comments, questions?
Can we ask Martin or Barry to explain that complex CPI on the cannabis tax question?
I'd actually like to invite Alicia Chattervadula
Hey, Chair.
help us with that, if that's...
Responding to Diana Gamzon's question.
Oh, absolutely, sure.
Hi, I'm Alicia Chattervadula, the CFAO with CDA, and the reason that's listed as complex is because in those fees, there is a number of different departments that get calculated. So rather than just put a CPI on it, for instance, the year we do the fee study, some rates go up 2%, some go up 5%, so it's a combination mix. So I take every single hourly rate for each department and then calculate it up and put it in there. So it's in the case when it's a CPI across the board, it's fine. But in this case where you had cannabis going up 7.2 and planning going up 5.29, you can't just do a percent across.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Heidi,
You're
thank you
welcome.
for catching that. And Diana, I apologize. Sure, Hardy.
Yeah, thank you. There were questions early on in the budget process about cannabis permitting and enforcement being segregated out so people can understand the kind of where they bifurcate and what revenue comes in from the permitting and taxation piece and what goes out in enforcement versus permitting. And we did have some conversations in the budget subcommittee, and as well Martin and I had another one yesterday. And based on the way that all of those things are wrapped together, it's going to take essentially an estimation from staff to make that delineation, but I think we can get there, and I think it'll be relatively accurate for understanding purposes of, understanding what revenue comes in, where it goes, and how county services are supported through that revenue. So I just wanted to let everybody know if you're asking about that, it's in process, and we hope to have more info for you coming forward.
Sue or Lisa? Very good. All right, then we are down to some motions. I think we have two motions left. The first motion is to vote on the resolution to establish a consolidated user fee schedule for county departments and update or revise user fee schedules for services provided by information and general services, airport and facilities, library, public guardian, and the treasurer tax collector, and rescinding resolution 22-292. Motion?
So moved.
Motion Supervisor Bullock.
I'll second.
Second Supervisor Hall. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. District 4,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 1,
Yes.
District 5,
Yes.
and District 2.
Yes. And finally, we have a call for a motion of intent and a second to adopt the IGS airport and facilities, library, public guardian, treasurer tax collector budgets. Motion, please.
Okay, motion.
Motion. Motion Supervisor Hall, second Supervisor Hook. Madam Clerk?
District 4,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
District 1,
Yes.
District 5,
Yes.
and District 2.
Yes. And with that, thank you, Martin, Barry. Thank you to all of your staff, financial folks involved with this. And with this, our meeting's adjourned.
Is there an ice cream party?
When you adopt the budget.
That's next week.